Tonight we are entering one of the most famous and unsettling stories in Genesis, the story of Noah's family and the flood. But this is not only a story about rain animals, an ark, and a rainbow in the sky. The deeper question is far more difficult. Why, out of an entire world described as violent and corrupt, was one family chosen to survive? Why Noah? Why his household? Why were his wife, his sons, and his sons' wives carried through judgment when everyone else disappeared beneath the waters? And when the door of the ark finally opened, what did this family bring into the world after the flood? Before we go further, take a moment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. What country are you in? What time is it there? Maybe it is late at night and the room around you is quiet. Maybe you are resting, working, or letting this ancient story unfold slowly in the background. Wherever you are, let us step back together into the earliest chapters of Genesis, into a world before Israel, before kings, before temples, before prophets stood in royal courts. The story begins in a world that has gone terribly wrong. Genesis does not describe the age before the flood as merely imperfect. It describes the earth as filled with violence. Human corruption has spread so deeply that the world itself seems wounded by what people have become. The ground that once received the breath of life now carries blood fear and broken trust. Humanity made to fill the earth with life has filled it instead with ruin. And then in the middle of that dark generation, one name appears: Noah. He is not introduced as a warrior. He is not a king with armies. He is not a builder of cities or a man surrounded by glory. The biblical text says he found favor in the eyes of the Lord. It says he was righteous, blameless in his generation, and that he walked with God. But being chosen did not mean Noah's family would be lifted gently out of danger. It meant they would be drawn into the heart of a terrifying mystery. A command would come, wood would be measured, pitch would seal the seams. A strange ark would rise on dry ground while the world around it continued toward judgment. And when the time came, Noah's family would not simply escape the flood. They would pass through it. They would enter a dark wooden chamber with the breath of living creatures around them. They would hear the door close. They would listen as the first drops of rain became a storm, as the waters rose, as the old world disappeared beyond the walls of the ark. They would survive, but survival would carry a cost. Because when the waters finally receded, Noah's family would step out onto wet earth as the fragile beginning of humanity's second world. So tonight we ask the question at the center of this ancient story: why was Noah's family chosen above everyone else? And what burden did they carry into the world after judgment? Before the ark rose from the ground, before the first animals moved toward its dark entrance, before rain began to strike the earth with the sound of judgment, there was a world that had already begun to drown from within. It did not look at first like a world at its ending. People still woke beneath the morning sky. Fires were still lit. Children were still born. Men and women still worked the ground, built shelters, guarded what belonged to them, and moved through the ordinary rhythms of life. From a distance, the world may have seemed alive, busy, expanding, and full of human strength. But Genesis asks us to look deeper than the surface. The biblical story does not begin the flood with clouds. It begins with corruption. It does not first show us water falling from heaven. It shows us violence filling the earth. The danger was not only above humanity waiting in the sky. It was already among them, spreading through their choices, their desires, their anger, their hunger for power, and the way human life had turned against itself. This is what makes the story of Noah so unsettling. The flood is not presented as a random disaster that interrupts an innocent world. It comes after the world has become something it was never meant to be. Creation, once described as good, has become wounded by the creatures placed within it. The earth has received human life, but now it is filled with human violence. Imagine that ancient world before the rain. There are no later kingdoms yet, no Israel, no Jerusalem, no temple, no throne of David, no prophets standing before kings. The story belongs to the earliest chapters of Genesis, to that strange and primeval age when the Bible speaks in broad foundational images. Humanity is still young in the narrative, but already the shadow inside the human heart has grown large. This is important for the listener who may be hearing the story for the first time. Genesis 1 through 11 is not telling the story of one nation yet. It is telling the story of beginnings, creation, temptation, exile from Eden, the first murder, the spread of human life, the spread of human violence, and the terrible question of what God will do when the earth becomes filled with corruption. The ground already remembers Abel's blood. That first murder when Cain rose against his brother did not remain an isolated wound in the story. It became a sign of what human freedom could become when desire hardened into violence. Brother turned against brother, and the earth itself seemed to receive the cry. From that first act, Genesis begins to trace a line. Sin does not stay private. Violence does not stay contained. What begins in one heart can spread through a family, then through a generation, then through a world. By the time Noah appears, that damage has become the atmosphere. The biblical text does not pause to give us long descriptions of cities, governments, armies, or named tyrants. It does not invite us to build a detailed map of the world before the flood. It gives us something more haunting and more universal. It says the earth was corrupt. It says the earth was filled with violence. Those words are simple, but they are heavy enough to darken everything around them. A corrupt world is not only a world where people occasionally do wrong, it is a world where wrong has become woven into the ordinary order of things. Trust breaks down. Strength becomes a weapon. Desire becomes law. The weak learn to fear the powerful. The powerful learn to love the fear they create. Families, fields, paths, and gates all begin to carry the same question. Who can be trusted when the human heart has turned against its own neighbor? The Bible does not need to show us every scene. It gives us the condition of the world, and the imagination can feel the rest. A man walking at dusk looks over his shoulder before entering his own dwelling. A family lowers its voice when footsteps pass outside. A boundary stone is moved in the night. A quarrel becomes bloodshed before anyone can stop it. The strong take what the weak cannot defend. The earth meant to be filled with life becomes filled with the sound of injury. This is not spectacle, it is decay. And the most frightening thing about decay is that those living inside it may stop noticing how far they have fallen. A violent world does not always look violent to the people who have adapted to it. It becomes normal. The language becomes harder. The eyes become colder. Children grow up learning the habits of fear. People begin to call survival wisdom, cruelty strength, and corruption the way things are. That is the kind of world Genesis places before us. It is important to move slowly here, because if we rush to the ark too quickly, we miss the weight of the choice that comes later. Noah's family was not chosen from a peaceful world that simply happened to face a storm. They were chosen from a world whose moral foundations had collapsed. Before the waters covered the earth, violence had already covered human life. The The flood story is therefore not only about destruction, it is about the question of whether a world can become so broken that continuation itself becomes judgment. If violence fills the earth, if corruption has entered the structures of human life, if every generation receives the damage and adds to it, then the story begins to ask a terrible question. Can such a world go on? Genesis brings that question into the presence of God. The biblical text speaks with striking emotional weight. God sees the corruption of the earth. God sees that the way of all flesh has become ruined. This is not the image of a distant deity noticing a small flaw from far away. The story presents divine attention as complete and penetrating. Nothing is hidden. The violence done in the open and the violence planned in secret are both seen. And more than that, the story speaks of divine grief. This is one of the most solemn parts of the Noah narrative. Before judgment is announced, sorrow is present. The Bible does not portray God as careless, impulsive, or entertained by destruction. The world's corruption is not treated like a minor rule being broken. It is treated like a wound that reaches into the heart of creation itself. That matters for the tone of this story. The flood should not be told like a disaster scene built for excitement. It should be told like a sacred tragedy, one in which the world has become so filled with violence that judgment comes with the heaviness of grief. The sky is still clear, but the story has already turned. Somewhere in that world, people continue as they have continued. They eat, they build, they make promises and break them. They take wives and raise children. They count their possessions. They measure their strength against the strength of others. Life continues, and that is part of the terror. The ordinary rhythm of the world can continue, even when the world is moving toward an unseen end. The end does not always announce itself with thunder. Sometimes the end begins when evil becomes ordinary. Sometimes a world moves toward judgment, not because people know they are near the edge, but because they have forgotten there is an edge at all. Into that world, the name Noah is introduced. The shift is quiet, but it is enormous. After the text describes a world filled with corruption and violence, it narrows the frame to one man. Noah does not enter the story surrounded by armies. He does not stand on a palace balcony. He does not speak in dramatic speeches. He appears almost silently, and the contrast is the point. Against the darkness of his generation, the Bible gives us a different kind of description. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That line changes the direction of everything. It does not yet explain all the details. It does not tell us every act of Noah's life, every choice, every prayer, every struggle, every moment when he refused the current of his age. The story does not give us a modern biography. Instead, it gives us a theological portrait in a few careful strokes. Noah is righteous. Noah is blameless in his generation. Noah walks with God. In a world filled with violence, those words are not soft. They are dangerous words. They mean Noah stands apart. They mean that while corruption has become the direction of the age, his life moves in another direction. To be righteous in a righteous generation might be honorable. To be righteous in a corrupt generation is costly. It means every step is taken against the pressure of the world around him. The phrase "in his generation" carries a quiet tension. It places Noah inside his time, not outside it. He is not an angel lowered into the story. He is a man living among the people whose violence fills the earth. He breathes the same air. He walks the same ground. He lives under the same sky that will soon open with rain. And yet the biblical text marks him as different. That difference should not be flattened into perfection. Genesis does not tell us that Noah is sinless. The story itself later on will remind us that the family preserved through the flood is still human, but at this moment in the narrative, Noah is set apart by the way he lives before God. In a generation rushing toward ruin, he is seen. This is the first answer to the question that guides the whole documentary. Why Noah's family? Because Noah found favor. Because Noah walked with God. Because when the world was filled with violence, one man was described as righteous before the Lord. But this first answer opens another question, rather than closing the mystery. What did it mean to be that man in that world? The biblical text does not invite us to invent scenes beyond what it says. We do not need to create arguments, speeches, or private conversations. But we can feel the pressure of the setting. Noah's righteousness did not exist in empty space. It existed in a world where corruption was not occasional but widespread. His obedience was not decorative. It was a form of resistance. Picture him moving through the dust of that world. Around him, the patterns of human life have turned dark. Men with hard faces gather near the paths. Fires burn at night, not always for warmth. Voices rise and fall with suspicion. The earth itself feels restless, as if creation is waiting for an answer to the violence that has entered it. Noah walks through this world not untouched by its danger, but not surrendered to its spirit. This is where the story begins to become cinematic, not with rain but with contrast. The camera does not need to rush to the ark. It can linger first on the world that makes the ark necessary. A horizon under a low sky. A settlement where silence follows an act of violence. A path where footprints cross dry earth. A face turned away from blood. And then Noah, not glowing, not heroic in the modern sense, but steady walking differently from the world around him. The story says he walked with God. That phrase gives the chapter its deepest quietness. To walk with God is not described here as a dramatic performance. It is a way of life, a direction, a continual movement. In a world where the human way has become corrupt, Noah's way is aligned with the one who sees the earth clearly. This makes Noah's difference relational, not merely moral. He is not simply a man with better habits. He is a man whose life is oriented toward God, while his generation is oriented toward violence. That is why his chosenness cannot be reduced to luck. It comes from a relationship that stands in contrast to the age around him. But the story does not allow us to keep Noah alone for long. Genesis names his sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The mention feels brief, but it matters deeply. Noah is already a father before the ark is built. He has a household before he has a vessel. He belongs to a family before he becomes the survivor through whom the future continues. This detail is easy to pass over, but it becomes central to our question. Noah was seen by God, but Noah was not preserved alone. His wife would enter the ark. His sons would enter. The wives of his sons would enter. The biblical text does not give us their names, their fears, their conversations, or their private thoughts. It leaves them mostly silent. Yet their silence does not make them unimportant. They stand at the center of the human future. When the flood comes, humanity will become small enough to fit inside one household. The future will not be carried by a city, a kingdom, or an army. It will be carried by a family. This is one of the most powerful elements of the story because it makes the scale both enormous and intimate. The whole human story narrows to a few people enclosed in wood. That is part of the cost of being chosen. To be chosen in this story is not to be lifted above history. It is to become responsible for what remains after history collapses. Noah's family will not simply survive for themselves. They will become the bridge between the world before judgment and the world after it. Every later human story in the biblical imagination will pass through them. But at this early moment, the family does not yet stand on wet ground after the flood. They are still in the old world. The ark has not yet risen. The rain has not yet begun. The command has not yet fully taken shape. They live in the last days before the warning becomes wood. This makes their position more haunting. Noah's household exists between two realities. On one side is the world they know violent and corrupt, but familiar. On the other side is a future no human eye has seen. They do not yet know what it will mean to be the only ones carried through. They do not yet know the sound of rain on the roof of the ark. They do not yet know the long darkness of waiting. But the story is moving toward them. The corruption of the world and the favor found by Noah are not separate facts. They are the two poles of the coming drama. The earth is filled with violence, and Noah walks with God. The world is moving toward judgment, and one household is being prepared for preservation. The ground is still dry, but the future has already begun to divide. This division should be felt before it is explained. The viewer should sense that Noah's difference is not merely personal. It is historical. It will become physical. It will become architecture. It will become a door that closes. It will become a dark interior, filled with breath, while water covers the earth outside. The line between Noah and his generation will eventually become the line between inside and outside the ark. For now, though, that line is invisible. It exists in the way Noah walks. It exists in the favor of God. It exists in the judgment that has not yet fallen. It exists in the grief of the Creator over a world that has filled itself with violence. It exists in the strange mercy that will soon be spoken before the waters come. That mercy is important because the story of judgment is never only judgment. Even here, before the ark is described, before the covenant is announced, before the animals are gathered, the presence of Noah means the end will not be absolute. The world that cannot continue will not simply vanish into nothing. Something will be preserved. Someone will be carried through. Life will pass through death, not because humanity has healed itself, but because God chooses not to let the human story end in corruption. This is the sacred tension at the heart of the flood. The world cannot continue as it is, but the story of the world will continue through one household. That is why the opening chapter must sit in the darkness long enough for the light of Noah's name to matter. If we rush past the violence, Noah's chosenness feels simple. If we remain with the corruption too long without hope, the story becomes despair. Genesis holds both together. It shows a world under judgment and a man who finds favor. The drama is not only that God will destroy, the drama is that God will preserve, and preservation in this story will take the shape of a family. Think again of the world before the flood as evening falls. The air grows cooler. Smoke lifts from scattered fires. Footsteps move along paths of dust. Somewhere, voices are raised in anger. Somewhere else, a door is barred before night. The world goes on, but it is not whole. It has become full of the thing that destroys human life from within. And somewhere within that same world, Noah walks. He is not yet inside the ark. He is not yet standing beneath a rainbow. He is not yet remembered as the survivor of the flood. He is simply a man seen by God in a generation that has become dark. His family is near him, still living under the sky that will one day pour down judgment. The ground beneath their feet is dry, But already the story has changed. Because once Noah is named, the question can no longer be only, why did the flood come? The question becomes, why was this family kept? That question will carry us forward. In the next movement of the story, Noah's difference will become more than a description. The God who sees the violence of the earth will speak to the man who walks with him. The warning will become a command. The command will become labor. And the future of humanity will begin to take shape, not in a palace, not on a battlefield, not in a temple, but in wood-pitch rooms and a strange ark rising under a sky that is still dry. Noah enters the story almost quietly, after Genesis has shown us a world filled with corruption and violence, after the earth itself seems to stand beneath the weight of human ruin. The narrative turns toward one man. It does not introduce him with a crown. It does not surround him with servants, soldiers, wealth, or political power. It gives him no royal city, no throne room, no army waiting for his command. Instead, it says that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That sentence is simple, but in the darkness of the story, it is like the first lamp burning in a ruined house. The world around Noah has become filled with violence, yet Noah is seen differently. The earth has grown corrupt, yet one man is described in words that separate him from the current of his age. The Bible does not slow down to explain every detail of his private life, but the few words it gives are enough to make him stand apart. Noah was righteous. Noah was blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Each phrase matters. To call Noah righteous is not to say that he was powerful. It is not to say that he understood every mystery, controlled every danger, or possessed the kind of strength the world around him admired. Righteousness in this story is not shown through conquest or public achievement. It is shown through alignment, through a life turned toward God in a world that has turned toward violence. To say he was blameless in his generation places him inside the very world that had become corrupt. Noah was not living in a separate heaven above the human condition. He breathed the same air. He heard the same voices. He walked the same ground that had been filled with blood suspicion and fear. The phrase does not remove him from his time. It makes his faithfulness more striking because it locates him within it. And then comes the deepest phrase of all, Noah walked with God. The Bible does not say this as a decoration. It gives the image of movement, direction, nearness, and daily life. To walk with someone is not only to think about them from far away. It means the steps of life are somehow shared. It means the path is not chosen alone. In Genesis, this phrase carries an ancient echo. Earlier in the story, Enoch is also described as walking with God. The text does not pause to turn that echo into an explanation, but it lets us feel the weight of the phrase. In a world where human beings are moving away from God and toward violence, Noah is moving in another direction. That is why the image of walking is so powerful for this story. Picture a road of dust beneath an old sky. Around Noah, men and women move with the urgency of a world that has lost its moral center. Some move to protect what they fear losing. Some move to take what does not belong to them. Some move with rage, some with hunger, some with the numbness of people who have watched violence become ordinary. Noah also moves, but his movement is different. The story does not need to show him shouting against the whole world. It does not need to invent public speeches or dramatic confrontations. His difference is quieter, and perhaps for that reason, more unsettling. He walks with God while his generation walks another road. In a violent age, the quietest difference can become the most visible one. This is where Noah becomes more than a familiar figure from a childhood story. He is not only the man who builds the ark. Before he is a builder, he is a walker. Before he receives the measurements, the wood, and the command he is already living in a way that has made him visible to God. The ark will later make his obedience enormous and physical. But Noah's story begins before the first beam is cut. It begins with a life. That matters because many people remember Noah mainly through the object associated with him. The ark becomes the center of the imagination. The animals, the rain, the great wooden structure resting on the waters. But Genesis does not begin with the ark. It begins with the condition of the world and the character of one man within it. The ark is not the reason Noah is chosen. The ark is the shape his chosenness will eventually take. This order is important. If we reverse it, we misunderstand the story. Noah is not chosen because he is a skilled shipbuilder. He is not preserved because he already knows how to survive a flood. The biblical text does not introduce him as an engineer, a sailor, or a strategist. He is chosen before the task makes sense to human eyes, and the task will only make sense because God speaks. This is one of the strange tensions in Noah's story. The world around him is full of visible evidence of corruption, but the judgment that is coming is not yet visible. The sky has not opened. The waters have not risen. The ark has not yet become a dark chamber of survival. To the human eye, life still continues. But God sees what the world is becoming. That is why Noah's walking with God matters so deeply. If a person walks only by the visible condition of the world, he may think everything will continue as before. The fires are still burning. The ground is still dry. People still marry, build, eat, labor, trade, argue, and sleep. The ordinary rhythm of life can hide the approach of judgment, but Noah's life is oriented toward the one who sees beneath ordinary rhythm. The biblical text does not tell us how long Noah had walked with God before the command came. It does not give us the long history of his obedience. It simply shows us that when God speaks, Noah is the man who hears. His life has already been turned in the direction from which the warning will come. That is not a small thing. In a corrupt generation, hearing God is not merely receiving information. It is being drawn into separation. Once Noah hears what God says about the earth, he can never again live as though the world is safe in its corruption. The warning changes him before it changes the sky. This is where being chosen begins to reveal its cost. From a distance, chosenness can sound like privilege. Noah found favor. Noah was preserved. Noah and his family entered the ark. But inside the story, favor is not comfortable. Favor becomes a burden of knowledge. Noah is given a future that no one else can see yet. He is told that the world he knows is approaching its end, and he must live with that knowledge under a dry sky. Imagine the weight of that. The ground beneath him remains firm. The paths remain familiar. The sounds of the world continue. People still wake and work and speak as though tomorrow belongs to them. But Noah has heard that the end of all flesh has come before God because the earth is filled with violence. He knows the world is continuing, but not in innocence. He knows the ordinary days are numbered. The Bible does not tell us how people reacted to Noah during the time before the flood. It does not give us a crowd mocking him in direct dialogue, though later traditions and sermons often imagine such scenes. For this documentary, we do not need to turn imagination into fact. The biblical silence is strong enough. What we know is that Noah obeyed, and obedience in this story is not a feeling hidden inside the heart. It will become visible. It will become labor. It will become wood dragged across the ground rooms, shaped inside a vessel, pitch spread over seams, a massive structure slowly rising in a world that has not yet seen rain fall in judgment. Before that labor begins, the story brings us back to Noah's household. This is where chapter 2 becomes more intimate. Noah is not introduced as a lonely mystic detached from ordinary human life. He is a husband. he is a father. His life before God is also a life surrounded by family, by names, by future generations, not yet born. Genesis names his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. For a first-time listener, these names may seem like small details, but in Genesis, names often become doorways into the future. Shem, Ham, and Japheth will later stand at the beginning of the peoples who spread across the earth after the flood. At this moment, however, they are not yet fathers of nations. They are Noah's sons, living inside the last generation before the waters. The text also tells us that Noah's wife will enter the ark, and that the wives of his sons will enter as well. It does not tell us their names. It does not give us their speeches. It does not reveal their private fears, their questions, or their memories of the world before the flood. Their silence has often made them easy to overlook. But the story cannot continue without them. They are not background figures in the deepest sense. They are part of the household through which human life will continue. When the ark closes, the future of humanity will not be carried by Noah alone or by his sons alone. It will be carried by a family, men and women, enclosed together in the place of preservation. The biblical text gives the moral description mainly to Noah. He is the one called righteous. He is the one said to walk with God. He is the one addressed by the divine command. But the mercy that comes to Noah gathers his household into the future. That distinction matters. The story does not say that every member of Noah's family is described in the same way Noah is described. We should not invent what the text does not give. But neither should we treat them as accidental passengers. They enter because God's preservation of Noah is also the preservation of a human future. Mercy comes to one man, then widens around the household through whom life will continue. In the biblical world, a household is more than a private emotional circle. It is a place of inheritance, memory, labor, responsibility, and continuity. A father's calling can shape those who belong to him. A family can carry blessing. A family can carry consequence. A family can become the fragile vessel through which history moves forward. Noah's household will become exactly that. When the flood comes, there will be no human institution left standing outside the ark. No city, no court, no army, no market, no council of elders, no old social order to rebuild from. The human future will be reduced to one family inside one vessel. That is an astonishing narrowing of history. The world before the flood is vast enough to be described as the whole earth. The world after the flood will begin with a household. This makes Noah's family both protected and burdened. They are protected because they enter the ark. They are burdened because everything after judgment will depend upon them. They will carry human life forward, but they will also carry human weakness forward. The flood will change the world around them, but it will not turn them into something other than human. This is why the story must not be told too simply. If Noah's family is chosen only as a reward, the story becomes flat. If they are chosen only because they are biologically necessary for repopulating the earth, the story becomes mechanical. Genesis gives us a deeper pattern. Noah finds favor. Noah walks with God. Noah's household is brought with him. Life is preserved through family, and covenant will later be spoken over Noah, his descendants, and every living creature. The choice of Noah is personal, but the result is cosmic. One man walks with God, and through his household, creation's future is carried through judgment. That is why Noah's family must be felt, even when the text does not give them many words. In a cinematic retelling, they can appear through presence rather than invention. A wife standing near the unfinished beams. Sons watching their father measure what no one else understands. daughters-in-law moving through the shadow of a household drawn into a warning larger than themselves. No one needs to speak. Their silence can hold the weight of what is coming. They are living before the flood, but their lives have already been claimed by the future after it. This is one of the deepest emotional tensions of the story. Noah's family belongs to the old world by birth, memory, and daily life. But they are being prepared for a world that does not yet exist. They still walk among familiar things, but soon all familiar things will be covered. They still hear the sounds of ordinary life, but soon the only human voices they hear will be inside the ark. Being chosen begins by separating them inwardly before it separates them physically. At first, the separation is invisible. Noah is different because he walks with God. His household is different because it is attached to his calling. The ark has not yet stood between them and the world. The door has not yet divided humanity into inside and outside. But the line is already forming. It begins with favor. It deepens with warning. It will become visible through obedience. The biblical text says that God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its way upon the earth. Then God speaks to Noah. This movement matters. God's speech to Noah comes in response to what God sees in the world. The warning is not random. It is the divine answer to a world filled with violence. The Lord tells Noah that the end of all flesh has come before him. Those words must have fallen with a weight no human voice could carry. They were not a weather forecast. They were not a local danger. They were not a warning about one enemy tribe or one season of famine. They were a sentence over a world, and Noah hears them. The man who walked with God now receives the burden of knowing what God will do. This is the point where the story's mystery grows darker. Noah's righteousness does not remove him from the judgment immediately. Instead, it places him at the center of the preparation for it. He will not be asked merely to believe that the world is corrupt. He will be asked to build the place where life will survive its judgment. The command is coming. Make yourself an ark. Those words will turn Noah's invisible difference into visible labor. They will draw his family into a long season of preparation. They will make the coming judgment impossible to separate from the ordinary world of wood tools, sweat, and waiting. The ark will rise on dry ground like a question no one can answer unless they believe the warning behind it. Before the first plank becomes part of the ark, we should pause over the man who receives the command. Noah is not dramatic in the way many later biblical figures are dramatic. Moses will confront Pharaoh. Elijah will stand against prophets of Baal. David will face Goliath and later struggle beneath the weight of kingship. Jeremiah will weep over a city moving toward exile. Noah does not speak with that kind of recorded voice in Genesis. His drama is quieter. Noah's drama is obedience without much speech. This silence can be difficult for modern storytelling because we often expect heroes to explain themselves. We want inner monologues, arguments, doubts spoken aloud, emotional conflict placed directly on the surface. But Genesis often works with a different kind of power. It shows action. It lets silence gather weight around obedience. Noah hears. Noah does. That pattern will appear more than once. The text repeatedly emphasizes that Noah did according to what God commanded him. This is one of the clearest features of his character. His faithfulness is not described through eloquence. It is embodied in response, and that response makes him different from the world. A corrupt generation may still be busy. It may still build work and move, but its movement is not obedience. It is self-directed, violent, and ruined. Noah also works. Noah also builds. Noah also fills his days with action. But his work is ordered by a divine word. The difference between two worlds can sometimes be seen in two kinds of labor. One labor grasps, takes, dominates, and corrupts. The other receives, obeys, prepares, and preserves. Noah's labor will belong to the second kind. This gives the chapter a visual center before the ark fully appears. We can imagine Noah's hands before we imagine the whole vessel. Hands that have known ordinary work now become instruments of warning. Hands that once belonged only to the rhythms of family and survival now become part of a task that will hold the future of life. And near those hands is his household. The family layer should remain close. Noah's sons are named because they matter for what comes after. Shem, Ham, and Japheth will become the fathers of lines that spread into the post-flood world. But at this moment, they are not yet ancestors in the eyes of history. They are sons standing before a father whose life has been interrupted by God's warning. Their wives are present in the future of the story, though unnamed. They too will step into the ark. They too will pass through the waters. They too will become part of humanity's continuation. The biblical text gives them little voice, but the world after the flood cannot be imagined without them. This is one of the quiet ways Genesis reminds us that survival is not individual. Noah may be the one named righteous. Noah may be the one addressed by God. Noah may be the one commanded to build. But the future is household shaped. The mercy that comes to him widens around those connected to him. The ark will not preserve a solitary saint. It will preserve a family animal's breath and the fragile possibility of a world after judgment. Here the question becomes more intimate. What does it mean for a family to be carried by the faithfulness of one man? The biblical text does not answer this with a doctrine or explanation. It answers with movement. They enter with him. They are shut in with him. They emerge with him. Their lives become bound to his obedience and to God's purpose beyond him. That is both mercy and weight. There may be comfort in belonging to the chosen household, but there is also no way to stand apart from its calling. Noah's family will not watch judgment from a safe distance. They will not be spectators.
You build a boat when the world
They
burns?
will live inside the
He is
consequence
mad.
of Noah's obedience. They will hear the same rain. They will feel the same lifting of the ark. They will wait through the same long silence. This is why the chosen angle matters so deeply. Being chosen above everyone else sounds at first like being rescued from cost. But in Noah's story, being chosen means being entrusted with cost. The family is spared from destruction, but not from the experience of judgment. They are preserved, but preservation comes through darkness, enclosure, waiting, and loss. That truth begins here with Noah walking differently. His walk will lead to the ark. The ark will lead to the door. The door will lead to the waters. And the waters will lead to a world where Noah's family must begin again. But the story has not reached that place yet. For now, the sky remains dry. The corrupt world continues around them. The warning has been spoken. The command is about to take shape. Noah stands at the edge between hearing and building. This is a sacred threshold. Behind him is the world that cannot continue. Around him is the household that will be drawn into his calling. Before him is the strange work of obedience, a work that will look unreasonable until the day rain begins to fall. The man who walked differently must now build differently. He must take the invisible word of God and make it visible in wood. And as the first beams are prepared, as the shape of the ark begins to rise under an unchanged sky, the mystery deepens. Mercy is already being built before judgment arrives. The world outside has not yet seen water, but Noah's household has already been given a future inside a vessel no one can understand unless they believe what God has said. The command came before the rain. That is one of the most important details in the story of Noah. The sky had not yet broken open. The ground had not yet disappeared beneath rising water. The old world still stood in its familiar shape, with its paths, shelters, fields, fires, and voices. Yet into that ordinary world, God spoke of an end that no human eye could yet see. Noah had already been described as a man who walked with God. But now that walk would become heavier. It would no longer remain only a hidden direction of the heart or a quiet life set against the corruption of his generation. It would become visible in timber measurements rooms and sealed walls. The man who walked differently would now have to build differently. The Lord told Noah that the earth was filled with violence and that the end of all flesh had come before him. Then came the instruction that would change the shape of Noah's life: make yourself an ark. The words were simple, but the task was enormous. This was not a small shelter. It was not a hidden cave prepared for one family to wait out a storm. It was not a vessel meant for ordinary travel from one shore to another. The ark was to become a great enclosed structure, built according to divine instruction, with rooms inside and a covering of pitch to seal it against the waters that had not yet arrived. Before the world saw judgment, Noah was asked to prepare mercy. This is where the story turns. Until now, Noah's difference has been described. He found favor. He was righteous. He was blameless in his generation. He walked with God. But from this point forward, his difference takes on weight texture, sound, and labor. Obedience becomes something that can be seen from a distance. Wood must be gathered, shaped, and fitted into a form no ordinary day seemed to require. Surfaces must be sealed. Rooms must be made. A future no one can yet see must be given walls, floors, and a door. The ark before the rain is one of the strongest images in Genesis because it stands in the middle of a world that does not yet look like it needs one. A boat makes sense beside water. A shelter makes sense under storm clouds. A refuge makes sense when danger is visible. But Noah's ark rises under a sky that has not yet begun to fall. That is the tension. Noah is building according to a word that has not yet become visible to the world around him. The warning exists before the evidence. Judgment has been announced before the first drop touches the earth. The ark becomes the shape of trust before the world understands why trust was necessary. To a modern listener, the story may feel familiar because we already know what comes next. We know the waters will rise. We know the door will close. We know the ark will lift from the ground and carry life through the flood. But Noah's obedience happened before that certainty appeared in the landscape. He built in the interval between warning and fulfillment. That interval is where faith becomes costly. It is one thing to react when the storm has already begun. It is another thing to shape a long season of labor, household life, and human reputation around a judgment that has not yet arrived. Noah did not wait until the first water covered his feet. He responded while the earth was still dry. The biblical text does not give us the daily rhythm of construction in detail. It does not tell us how many times Noah lifted tools, how his hands grew tired, how long each stage took, or what the world outside thought as the ark grew larger. It does not record conversations between Noah and his sons. It does not preserve the voice of his wife or the thoughts of his daughters-in-law. The story remains restrained, but the restraint does not make the scene small. In fact, it gives the ark a greater silence. We do not hear many human words, so we hear the work itself. The sound of wood being moved, the scrape of tools, the heavy rhythm of labor beneath an ordinary sky, the gradual rise of a structure that did not belong to the world as it was, but to the world that was coming. Every beam was a response to God's warning. Every sealed surface was an act of trust. Every room prepared inside the ark was a declaration that life would not end with judgment. The ark was more than an object. It was a visible contradiction. It stood against the assumptions of the age. The world around Noah continued in its violence and corruption, but the ark said that the world would not continue forever. People could ignore the warning, misunderstand it, or live as though nothing would change. Still, the ark kept rising. A structure can speak without words. Yet this story should be careful with that idea. Genesis does not give us a long scene of Noah preaching to crowds beside the ark. Later traditions and interpretations often imagine Noah as a warning voice to his generation, and the New Testament later calls him a herald of righteousness. But the Genesis narrative itself focuses more on obedience than speech. It shows Noah receiving the command and doing as God commanded him. That focus is powerful. Noah's answer to God is not first preserved as a speech. It is preserved as action. He does not need to explain himself to become faithful within the story. He obeys, and his obedience becomes architecture. The ark slowly changes the world around it. At first, it may be imagined as scattered materials, wood on the ground, measured spaces, unfinished lines. Then it begins to take shape. A frame rises. Its scale becomes difficult to ignore. Its shadow stretches over the earth. What began as obedience in Noah's heart becomes a great dark form standing in the open. But the ark is not only large, it is strange. It is built for a catastrophe no one has yet seen. It is built to float where there is no flood. It has no purpose in the ordinary world except to testify that the ordinary world is not safe. The ark belongs to the future, and that makes it unsettling in the present. This is why chapter 3 is the central turning point of the documentary. The story has moved from corruption to chosenness. Now it moves from chosenness to preparation. Noah is no longer only the man who is different. He becomes the man whose difference requires visible, costly obedience. The question is no longer only, why was Noah chosen? It becomes, what did being chosen demand from him and from his household? That household must remain near the center of this chapter. Noah is the one God addresses. Noah is the one described as righteous. Noah is the one commanded to build. But he is not being prepared for a private rescue. The covenant language that appears in the command makes this clear. God says he will establish his covenant with Noah, and that Noah will enter the ark with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. For viewers hearing the word for the first time, a covenant in the biblical story is not merely a feeling of kindness. It is a solemn promise that shapes the future. It binds the coming story to the faithfulness of the one who speaks it. Here, before the waters rise, covenant means that judgment will not be the only movement in the story. Mercy is already being spoken before the waters rise. That detail changes the emotional meaning of the ark. It is not only a last-minute escape, it is the physical place where a promise will be carried through judgment. Before the first rain, before the world disappears, before Noah knows what it will feel like to wait in the darkness of the ark, God has already named a future beyond the flood. This is not judgment without mercy, but it is also not mercy without judgment. The ark holds both together. It is built because the world is under judgment. It is built because life will be preserved. Its wood belongs to warning and promise at the same time. Its walls will stand between destruction and survival, but they will not remove Noah's family from the experience of the waters. They will carry them through. That is the heart of the chosen angle. Being chosen did not mean Noah's family would avoid the flood in any simple sense. It meant they would live inside the only place where life could pass through it. Picture Noah's household during the days of construction. Again, we should not invent dialogue or private scenes beyond the text, but we can place them where the text places them close enough to Noah's calling that they will eventually enter with him. They are not distant from the ark. Their future is being shaped by every piece of wood. His sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, stand inside the story not only as children of Noah, but as the men through whom the post-flood world will spread. Yet before they are names connected with future peoples, they are sons living under the shadow of their father's obedience. Their lives are being drawn into a warning they did not receive first, but one that will define them completely. Their wives are even quieter in the text. They are present, but unnamed. Their silence should not be filled with invented speeches. It should be honored. They matter because they will enter. They matter because the future of humanity is not carried by Noah alone, or by his sons alone, but by households, unions, descendants, generations not yet born. The ark is being built for all of them. This makes the story intimate in a way that its scale could easily hide. The flood is total in the language of Genesis, a judgment over the world Noah knows, and the preservation of life through one ark. The waters will cover the earth, but the human future is held in the lives of 8 people. The scale narrows until the destiny of humanity depends on one household entering one vessel. The ark, then, is not only a structure of survival, it is a family chamber. It contains rooms, spaces, divisions, places for living creatures and supplies. It is designed to preserve breath. But inside its wooden body, it will also contain memory, fear, waiting, and the unspoken knowledge that the world outside is ending. It will protect Noah's family, but it will also confine them. This dual meaning should be felt long before the door closes. While the ark is still being built, it already carries the emotional weight of what it will become. It is refuge, but it is also separation. It is mercy, but mercy with walls. It is promise, but promise shaped like enclosure. The family chosen above everyone else is not being led to a palace, a garden, or a mountain of safety above the flood. They are being prepared for a dark vessel that will move wherever the waters carry it. Noah will not steer the flood. This is another detail worth feeling carefully. The ark is not described as a vessel of conquest or navigation. It is not a ship for exploration. Noah is not being trained to master the waters. He is being told to prepare a place where life can be kept while forces beyond him reshape the world. That gives the story a profound humility. The chosen man does not control judgment. He obeys within it. The chosen family does not command the waters. They are carried. Their survival will not come from mastery over the catastrophe, but from being enclosed in the mercy God has commanded Noah to build. The ark before the rain is therefore not a monument to human genius. It is not an achievement Noah can claim as his own vision. It is obedience made visible. Its design comes from God. Its purpose comes from God. Its necessity is known because God has revealed what human eyes cannot yet see. Still, Noah must build it with human hands. This combination gives the scene its sacred gravity. God speaks, but Noah works. God warns, but Noah measures. God promises covenant, but Noah covers the ark with pitch. The divine word does not erase human labor. It summons it. In this way, the ark becomes the meeting point between revelation and obedience. And day after day, that obedience continues under a dry sky. The dryness matters. It gives the chapter its suspense. The earth is still dry while Noah builds a vessel for waters that have not come. The air still holds ordinary dust. The horizon still looks familiar. People can still walk past the unfinished ark and think the world is unchanged. But the ark knows otherwise, or rather the ark testifies to what Noah has heard. There is a deep sadness in the possibility that a warning can stand in the open and still not be understood. The ark rises slowly, but the corruption of the world does not seem to loosen its grip. Genesis gives us no scene of mass repentance before the flood. It gives us no reversal where the violent generation turns back. The world continues toward the judgment already announced. The ark grows. The world continues. The gap between those two movements becomes the tension of the chapter. One movement is hidden obedience becoming visible. The other is visible life hiding coming judgment. Noah's work belongs to the future God has spoken. The world's corruption belongs to the past that refuses to end until judgment falls. Between them stands the household chosen with Noah. We can imagine the ark's shadow lengthening over them as the structure rises. The work changes the shape of their days. It changes their relationship to the world around them. They cannot unknow what Noah has heard. They cannot look at the ark as an ordinary object. Its growing walls are a reminder that their lives are being pulled toward a day no one can avoid. This is why the story of Noah's family is not a simple rescue story. Rescue, in ordinary imagination, happens quickly. Danger appears, and someone is pulled away. But Noah's family lives through a long preparation before rescue becomes visible. They must dwell in the time between warning and fulfillment. They must be connected to the ark before the ark is needed. This waiting before the rain may be one of the most psychologically powerful parts of the story, even though Genesis does not describe it at length. What does it mean to live beside the thing that will save you before anyone else believes it matters? What does it mean to belong to a household whose future is being built in public plank by plank while the world continues as though nothing is wrong? What does it mean to be chosen before there is any visible proof that chosen is necessary? These questions give the chapter its depth. They allow the story to remain biblical without becoming flat. We do not need to add unsupported details. The tension already exists in the sequence of events. God warns. Noah builds. The rain has not yet come. The ark also changes how we understand righteousness. Righteousness in chapter 2 was a description of Noah's life before God. In chapter 3, righteousness becomes obedience under pressure. It is not merely that Noah is morally different. It is that when God commands something difficult, strange, and future-facing, Noah does according to all that God commands him. The story emphasizes this. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. There is a calm strength in that repetition. It is not dramatic in the way a battle is dramatic, but it is powerful in a different way. It shows a man whose faithfulness is measured not by sudden emotion, but by sustained response. The ark could not be built by one moment of inspiration. It required continuity. Faithfulness here has the sound of daily labor. A beam set into place, a seam sealed, a room shaped, a command remembered again the next morning. This is good for animation because it gives the audience something concrete to see. Noah's obedience is not abstract. It is hands tools, wood pitch, scale sweat, and shadow. It is the ark slowly rising in the same world that God has judged corrupt. But the chapter should not become a construction documentary. The physical details matter only because they carry spiritual and narrative tension. The ark is compelling not because of its measurements alone, but because of what those measurements mean. Every dimension serves preservation. Every room anticipates life. Every covered surface anticipates water. The ark is a future made tangible, and within that future animals are also included. The story of Noah is often remembered through the animals, sometimes so much that the judgment and covenant nearly disappear behind a gentle image of pairs entering a boat. But in the biblical narrative, the animals are not decoration. They are living creatures drawn into the preservation of creation. The flood story does not only ask whether one family survives, it asks whether life itself will continue beyond human corruption. This widens the mercy of the ark. Noah's household will not be alone inside it. The ark will carry the breath of creatures that did not build it, did not understand it, and did not choose it. Their presence makes the ark feel fuller, heavier, more alive. It is not a private shelter. It is a moving remnant of creation. This matters later when the covenant after the flood is spoken not only over Noah and his descendants, but also over every living creature. The seeds of that wider promise are already here. Before the rain, God's command includes the preservation of life beyond humanity. Human violence has affected the earth, but divine mercy reaches toward the earth as well. The ark becomes a small world inside the old world. Before the flood, it stands incomplete and then complete under the sky. During the flood, it will become the only world left. After the flood, it will open and release life into the renewed earth. Its meaning changes, but its purpose remains the same: preservation through judgment. As chapter 3 moves toward its ending, the ark should feel ready, but not yet sealed. The story has reached the edge of final separation, but the door has not yet closed. The audience should feel that a threshold is approaching. Noah has heard. Noah has built. His household has been gathered into the promise. The creatures that will be preserved are being drawn toward the ark. The structure that once looked strange under a dry sky now stands as the only place prepared for what is coming. But the rain has not yet fully begun. This moment just before entry may be even more tense than the storm itself. Once the waters rise, the meaning of the ark becomes undeniable. But just before the waters, everything depends on trust. The door stands open. The world outside still exists. The sky still holds back. The old life has not yet disappeared. Noah's family stands between two worlds. Behind them is the earth they have always known, corrupt, violent, familiar, and doomed. Before them is the ark, dark and closed, unknown and merciful. To enter will mean being saved. It will also mean leaving the world behind before the world has vanished. This is the cost of being chosen beginning to take its final shape. The family that will carry humanity forward must first step away from humanity as it has become. They must enter the place prepared by obedience before the waters force everyone to understand. They must trust the warning while the dry ground still offers the illusion of safety. The ark before the rain stands open like a question. Will Noah's household go in? Will life be preserved? Will mercy hold when judgment begins? The next chapter will answer not with explanation, but with finality. The animals will enter. Noah's family will cross the threshold. The door will close. And the ark that was built under a dry sky will become a sealed chamber of mercy, surrounded by the waters of a world that could not continue. The ark had stood open before the rain. For a time, it was still possible to look at it from the outside. Its dark entrance faced the world like a question. Its wooden walls rose under a sky that had not yet broken. The ground around it was still firm. The paths were still visible. The world that Genesis describes as corrupt and violent still had the appearance of continuing. But the moment came when the ark was no longer only a warning, it became a boundary. Noah, his wife, his sons, and the wives of his sons entered the ark. The living creatures that were to be preserved entered with them. The story moves with solemn simplicity. It does not pause to describe the faces of Noah's family, or the last words spoken before the threshold was crossed. It does not give us the private thoughts of Shem, Ham, Japheth, or the women who would carry the future with them. The biblical text is restrained, but the restraint makes the scene heavier. The family enters, and with them enters the fragile future of humanity. The animals enter, and with them enters the breath of creation. The ark, once a strange structure under a dry sky, becomes a small world enclosed inside wood. Everything outside remains familiar for a few moments longer. Everything inside has already crossed into another reality. Inside the ark, the air is different. The smell of wood is no longer open to the wind. The pitch that sealed the seams now holds its dark scent in the enclosed space. The movement of animals gives the interior a living warmth. Human footsteps sound heavier against boards that can no longer be seen from outside. The vessel that once stood beneath the sky has become the only room in the world where the future is being kept. This is one of the great turning points of the story. Until now, Noah's obedience could still be watched from outside. The ark could be misunderstood, ignored, mocked, or treated as the strange work of a man whose life had turned away from his generation. But once Noah's household enters, the story no longer allows distance. The family is inside. The creatures are inside. The future is inside. Then the door closes. Genesis says that the Lord shut him in. That detail should be spoken slowly because it changes the meaning of the ark. Noah built it, but Noah does not finally seal the story by his own hand. The same God who warned him, the same God who gave the measurements, the same God who promised covenant, before the waters came, now closes the boundary between the world under judgment and the life that will be carried through it. The door is more than wood. It is the line between before and after. On one side is the old world still standing for an instant, but already given over to the judgment that has been announced. On the other side is a dark enclosure filled with breath, waiting, and uncertainty. Inside is mercy. Outside is the world that could not continue. But mercy in this moment does not feel soft. It feels sealed. The ark protects Noah's family, but it also shuts them in. It saves them, but it removes them from everything they have known. It becomes refuge and confinement at the same time. To be chosen is now no longer an idea, a description, or even a long act of building. It is a lived reality in the dark. The family that was chosen above everyone else is now inside a place they cannot open by ordinary will. The old world is behind them. The waters are ahead, and there is no path back. For a moment, perhaps the silence is the most powerful sound. The door has closed, but the full storm has not yet been felt. The light inside the ark is limited. The smell of wood-pitch animals, stored food, and human breath begins to fill the interior. The ark is no longer an object to be looked at. It is the space in which every remaining human life must wait. Then the rain begins. Do not imagine it first as a wall of water. Let it begin with a sound small enough to notice. A drop against wood. Then another, a faint tapping on the roof of the ark. A sound that at first could almost be mistaken for something ordinary. But the sound does not stop. The tapping grows steadier. The air changes. The sky that had held back now releases what the warning had promised. Rain falls on the ark, on the ground, on the paths, on the places where people had walked, as though the world would continue forever. Outside, the earth begins to darken. Water gathers in low places. Dust turns to mud. Familiar paths blur. The ground that once seemed firm begins to lose its certainty. What had been dry becomes slick. What had been stable begins to shift. The judgment that existed first as a divine word now becomes weather sound, weight movement, and rising water. Inside the ark, Noah's family hears it. This is where the flood should be told not as spectacle, but as experience. The camera does not need to remain outside watching destruction from a distance. It can remain inside the ark where the chosen family lives through the sound of judgment without being able to see all of it. They hear rain on wood. They hear animals moving in the dark. They hear the creak of beams under pressure. They hear water striking the sides. They hear the old world becoming unreachable. The ark begins as a shelter resting on the earth. Then the waters rise higher. The moment comes when the structure that had been built on dry ground is lifted. The ark leaves the earth beneath it. It no longer belongs to the world of paths, fields, and thresholds. It is carried. That lifting is both rescue and loss. For the first time, the ark does what it was built to do. It floats upon the waters. It preserves life. It proves that Noah's obedience was not madness, and that the warning had not been empty. Yet the same moment that proves the ark's purpose also means the ground outside is disappearing. The family survives as the world vanishes. This is the cost of being chosen. Noah's household is not standing on a high hill, watching waters pass beneath them. They are not far away from judgment. They are inside it, enclosed in the only place where life continues. The water that destroys the old world also carries the ark forward. The same flood that removes the ground from everyone outside becomes the force that lifts Noah's family into preservation. That tension must remain alive. The ark is mercy, but it is mercy surrounded by judgment. The walls are protection, but they also prevent return. The family is alive, but they are alive inside a world reduced to darkness, sound, breath, and waiting. At first, the mind may still remember the world outside in clear images. A doorway, a path, a familiar stretch of ground, a place where fire was once lit, faces from the world before the door closed, sounds that belonged to ordinary life. The story does not tell us what Noah's family remembered, and we should not pretend to know. But we can say what the narrative itself makes clear. When the waters rose, the world they had known was gone. They would not return to it. That is why survival here is not simple. To survive a judgment that erases the world is to become a witness to both mercy and loss. Noah's family is spared from death, but not from the knowledge that everything outside the ark has passed away. They are preserved, but preservation comes through separation. They are chosen, but the chosen life is enclosed in darkness. The ark moves over the waters. Outside, the flood covers the earth. Genesis presents the waters as overwhelming rising until the old order disappears beneath them. The language is vast, severe, and total within the world of the story. Life outside the ark is not treated as wounded, but continuing. It is cut off. The ark alone remains as the vessel of preservation. Inside, life is crowded and hidden. The breath of animals fills the space. Creatures that do not understand judgment are nevertheless carried through it. Birds, beasts, and creeping things are preserved not because they have built, spoken, or chosen, but because God's purpose for creation has not ended. Their presence makes the ark feel like a remnant of the created world folded into darkness. There is something deeply moving in that image. Humanity had filled the earth with violence, but the ark carries more than humanity. It carries life that belongs to the wider creation. The future after the flood will not be only human survival. It will be the release of living creatures back onto an earth that has passed through judgment. But for now, nothing is released. Everything waits. Waiting becomes the center of this chapter. In many retellings, the flood feels quick because the story is familiar. Rain comes, waters rise. The ark floats, the waters recede. But for Noah's family, the experience is not a quick summary. It is time. Day after day, inside an enclosed world. Sound after sound. The body learning the movement of the ark. The eyes adjusting to limited light. The mind living between memory and promise. They do not steer. They do not choose the direction. They do not know by sight what remains outside. This lack of control is part of the story's sacred weight. The chosen family is not chosen to master the flood. They are chosen to be carried through it. Their survival depends on the word God spoke before the rain the ark built in obedience, and the mercy that shut them in. To modern ears, mercy may sound like open space, relief, freedom, and light. In Noah's story, mercy first feels like a closed door. That is not contradiction. It is the nature of this particular salvation. The door closes so that life can remain. The darkness surrounds them so that the waters cannot take them. The ark becomes a hard wooden mercy, heavy enough to endure judgment. But the closed door also raises the question that has followed us from the beginning. Why this family? Why not a city? Why not a tribe? Why not a multitude? Genesis has already given the foundation. Noah found favor. Noah was righteous in his generation. Noah walked with God. But inside the ark, the answer takes on another shape. Noah's family is chosen because the human story will not be allowed to end in violence. They are not preserved as an isolated reward. They are preserved as a future. The future is now floating in the dark. That image is almost too small for its meaning. 8 human lives inside a wooden vessel, around them living creatures, beneath them rising waters, above them rain, behind them the world before judgment, ahead of them a world no one has yet seen. All of humanity's future has become enclosed. The ark becomes a womb of the renewed world, but it is also like a tomb for the world that has passed. It contains life, but it moves over death. It preserves breath, but it travels above silence. The biblical story does not use all these images directly, so the narration should not force them too heavily. But visually, the tension is there. Life hidden in wood carried over waters that have swallowed the old earth. The family chosen above everyone else is living inside that tension. Noah, the man who walked with God, now waits. His wife waits. Shem, Ham, and Japheth wait. Their wives wait. The animals wait with them, though without human understanding. The ark waits as the waters rise, prevail, and then remain. The story slows into endurance. Being chosen now means continuing to breathe when there is nothing to do but trust the one who commanded the ark in the first place. There is no heroic battle here. No enemy is defeated by Noah's hand. No speech turns the waters back. No human strength opens the sky or closes the deep. The drama is quieter and more severe. The chosen family survives by remaining inside what God has provided. That may be one reason Noah's obedience is so central. The time for building has ended. The time for waiting has begun. Once inside the ark, Noah cannot add another beam seal, another seam, or improve the structure from outside. The act of obedience that was performed before the rain must now hold during the rain. Preparation becomes preservation. The ark built under a dry sky now proves its purpose in a drowned world. This pattern gives the story deep emotional movement. What seemed strange before the flood becomes necessary during it. What looked like burden before the rain becomes shelter after the door closes. What required trust before visible evidence becomes the only reason life continues when evidence finally arrives. But even this fulfillment is not comfortable. The ark may be safe, but it is not home in the old sense. It has no field, no horizon, no open path, no ordinary future visible through its walls. It is temporary, but no one inside can hurry its ending. It is mercy, but mercy with no control over time. So the family waits. The rain continues for the appointed time. The waters increase. The ark floats above the earth. The familiar geography of the old world disappears beneath a surface that has no memory of roads. Mountains, valleys, fields, and dwellings are hidden under water. The world has become formless again in the experience of those who cannot see beyond the ark. Here Genesis carries an echo of creation itself. In the beginning, the earth was covered by the deep, and God brought order, separation, land, life, and blessing. In the flood, the waters return in terrifying abundance, and the ordered world seems to be undone. The story does not need a long theological lecture to make the point. The image is enough. Water covers what had been inhabited. The world seems to pass backward toward chaos, and inside that watery unmaking, the ark carries the seed of a new beginning. This is why the chosen family matters so much. They are not only survivors of disaster, they are the line through which creation will move forward. The world outside has been brought under judgment, but inside the ark, life is held for the day when land returns. Yet that day does not come quickly. There is a long middle in the flood story, and the long middle matters. Many stories rush from danger to rescue. Genesis makes us feel waiting. The waters do not vanish as soon as the ark floats. The family must remain enclosed. The creatures must remain inside. The promise must be trusted while the outside world remains hidden. In that waiting, chosen life becomes patient life. Noah cannot make the waters recede. His sons cannot open the door and step onto ground that is not there. His household cannot recreate the world by desire. They must wait for God to act again. This waiting protects the story from becoming a tale of human achievement. Noah's obedience is real and necessary, but it is not ultimate control. The ark is built by human hands, but deliverance depends on God's remembrance. Then after the waters have prevailed, the story reaches one of its most tender and powerful turns. God remembered Noah. The phrase does not mean that God had forgotten him, as a human being might forget. In the language of the biblical narrative, remembrance is action. It is covenantal attention. It is the moment when the story begins to turn from judgment toward restoration. The waters that had risen will now begin to move toward retreat. This line is the first light after the long darkness. God remembered Noah and the living creatures with him in the ark. The chosen family is not abandoned in the vessel that saved them. Mercy does not seal them in forever. The same God who shut them in now begins the movement that will one day bring them out. But the change begins invisibly. Inside the ark, there may be no sudden transformation that human eyes can easily read. The waters begin to recede, but slowly. The wind passes over the earth. The depths are restrained. The rain is stopped. The story turns from rising to lowering, from covering to uncovering, from judgment to the possibility of land. The ark still floats. The door is still closed. Noah's family still waits. This is important. Divine remembrance does not instantly remove every sign of judgment. It begins restoration, but restoration has a rhythm. The world that was covered does not become habitable in a moment. Land must reappear. Waters must diminish. The ark must come to rest. The earth must become ready to receive life again. The family chosen above everyone else must endure not only the storm, but the slow return after the storm. This deepens the cost of their survival. They cannot rush out of the ark simply because the worst has passed. They must wait for the world to become a place where life can stand. The mercy that carried them through judgment also teaches them patience after judgment. Eventually, the ark comes to rest. The biblical story places it on the mountains of Ararat. The detail is quiet and powerful. The vessel that once rested on dry ground, then floated over the waters, now touches earth again. It does not yet mean the journey is finished, but it means the ark is no longer only drifting. Somewhere beneath it, land has returned. For the first time since the waters lifted them, the chosen family is connected again to the earth. Still, the door does not open immediately. That delay matters. The return of land is not the same as the release into new life. Noah must still wait. The earth must continue to dry. The story will move next through the raven and the dove, through signs of whether the world outside can once more hold the living. But chapter 4 should not rush too far into that renewal. Its task is to leave us at the edge between preservation and beginning again. Noah's family has survived judgment, but they have not yet stepped into the world after it. The ark remains closed. The waters are receding. The promise is still alive. The old world is gone. The new earth is not yet fully open beneath their feet. They are suspended between what has ended and what has not yet begun. This is the emotional place where the chapter should rest. The cost of being chosen is now clear. Noah's family was chosen not to avoid the flood, but to pass through it. They were sealed inside mercy while judgment surrounded them. They were preserved, but preserved through darkness, waiting, and the loss of the world they knew. And now, as the waters begin to withdraw, another question rises. What kind of life can begin after such an ending? When the door finally opens, Noah's family will not walk back into the world they left. They will step onto wet earth as the first human household of a changed world. They will carry gratitude, memory, covenant, and human frailty with them. The ark has saved them, but it has also brought them to a burden greater than survival. They must begin again. For now, the ark rests in silence. The waters move away slowly. The breath of life remains inside. And somewhere beyond the closed door, beneath a sky that has finally stopped pouring judgment, the earth waits to be seen again. For the first time in many days, the ark was no longer only floating. Beneath it, somewhere below the receding waters, earth had returned. The vessel that had lifted from the old world now rested upon ground again. But the story was not finished. The ark had stopped moving, yet Noah's family had not been released. The waters had begun to withdraw, yet the earth was not ready to receive life. For so long, the world had come to them only through wood, darkness, breath, and waiting. The waters had risen around them. The old earth had disappeared from sight. The ark had carried them through judgment, not by their strength, not by their control, but by the mercy that had enclosed them before the rain began. Now the movement of the story changed. The waters withdrew slowly, almost cautiously, as if the earth itself had to be uncovered again after passing through death. The world did not simply reappear as though the flood had been a passing storm. Restoration did not arrive as a sudden return to ordinary life. It came through waiting signs and the gradual reemergence of ground. The ark remained closed. That delay matters. Noah's family had survived, but survival was not the same as release. The worst of the waters had passed, yet they could not immediately step outside and begin again. The ground had to be ready. The earth had to dry. The world that would receive them had to become habitable once more. This is one of the quietest tensions in the story. The judgment is ending, but the new beginning has not yet arrived. Noah's family is alive, but still enclosed. They are preserved, but still waiting for the moment when preservation becomes life on the ground again. Then Noah opens the window of the ark. It is a small image after such an enormous catastrophe, but it carries deep emotional force. For the first time, the story allows movement outward from the sealed space. The ark has been a closed chamber of mercy. Now, through an opening, the world outside begins to be tested. Noah sends out a raven. The raven goes back and forth until the waters are dried up from the earth. It is a restless image, dark against the pale sky, moving over a world that is not yet fully restored. The bird does not bring the clear sign Noah is waiting for. It belongs to the uncertainty between water and land, between judgment and return. Then Noah sends out a dove. The dove searches for a place to rest, but at first it finds none. That detail should be felt slowly. The bird leaves the ark, crosses. The air moves over the face of the waters and returns because there is nowhere to set its foot. The world outside is still not ready to receive life, so Noah waits again. Waiting has already shaped the family's survival, and now it shapes their release. They waited while the rain fell. They waited while the waters prevailed. They waited after the ark came to rest. Now they wait between the flights of a bird. The whole human future is still inside the ark, and even after judgment has passed, the timing of new life belongs to God. After 7 days, Noah sends the dove again. This time, the dove returns in the evening, and in its beak is a freshly plucked olive leaf. The image is gentle, but it is not small. After the roar of rain, after the rising of the deep, after the silence of a world covered by water, a single leaf becomes a message. Somewhere beyond the ark, life has begun to show itself again. Somewhere branches have emerged. Somewhere the earth is no longer only water, silence and memory. The olive leaf is not the full world restored. It is a sign. That is often how hope enters biblical stories. Not always as complete possession, not always as immediate safety. Sometimes it comes as a small thing carried back from a place not yet reached. A leaf in a bird's mouth. A sign that the ground will one day receive footsteps again. Noah waits 7 more days and sends the dove out once more. This time the dove does not return. The absence speaks. The bird has found a place to live. The world outside the ark can now hold life. The chamber that preserved creation no longer needs to contain it forever. Mercy, that had once meant enclosure, is about to become release. But even then, Noah does not rush out by his own timing. The biblical rhythm remains careful. Noah sees that the face of the ground is drying, but the command to leave comes from God. The same God who told him to enter now tells him to go out. The same God who shut him in now opens the way into the renewed earth. Noah's survival has never been a story of self-directed escape. He did not invent the ark. He did not command the waters. He did not decide when judgment began. He did not determine when the door would open. From beginning to end, the story presents him as a man who hears, obeys, waits, and moves when God speaks. Then the moment arrives. Noah goes out of the ark. His wife goes with him. His sons go with him. The wives of his sons go with them. The animals go out, every living thing according to their kinds. The sealed world inside the ark opens into the renewed world outside it. The door that once closed to preserve them now opens to send them into responsibility. This should not be imagined as a loud celebration. The text does not give us triumphant music, shouting crowds, or a city waiting to greet them. There is no old home to return to, no familiar gate, no neighbor's fire in the distance, no marketplace beginning again the next morning. Noah's family does not step back into the life they left. They step onto wet earth. The ground beneath their feet is both new and wounded. It is the same earth, but changed by judgment. It can receive life again, but it carries the memory of what has passed. The air is open. The sky is no longer pouring rain. The ark stands behind them as the vessel that carried them through, but before them is a world almost empty of human sound. Noah had once walked with God in a corrupt generation. Now his family takes the first steps on an earth after judgment. The walking motif returns, but everything has changed. Before, Noah walked through a world filled with violence. Now he walks out of the ark with his household onto ground that has been uncovered again. The old paths are gone. The old sounds are gone. The future lies before them without roads. This is the burden of beginning again. To survive is one thing. To begin again after a world has ended is another. Noah's family is not merely a group of rescued individuals. They are the fragile beginning of humanity's second world. Every future path, every future household, every future city, every future language, every future conflict, every future prayer, and every future generation will flow in the biblical imagination through the lives that have just stepped out of the ark. The scale is almost impossible to hold. 8 people stand on the ground, and the human future stands with them. This is why the story of Noah's family cannot be reduced to a simple reward. They were chosen, yes. They were preserved, yes. But their preservation places a weight upon them. The world behind them is gone. The world ahead of them is unbuilt. They carry life forward, but they also carry memory, and they carry something else. They carry humanity itself, with all its mystery, dignity, and danger. The flood has judged the violent world. It has removed the corruption that filled the earth. But the flood has not turned human beings into something other than human beings. Noah's family emerges into a cleansed world, but their hearts remain part of the same human story that began in Eden, moved through Cain and Abel, and led into the violence before the flood. This is the sober depth of Genesis. The earth can be washed, but the human condition is not made simple by water. Before that hard truth appears fully, the story gives us Noah's first action after leaving the ark. Noah builds an altar to the Lord. This moment is deeply important. After surviving the flood, Noah does not first build a house. He does not first mark out a city. He does not first claim territory, organize power, or raise a monument to himself. His first recorded act on the renewed earth is worship. Smoke rises from the altar into the open sky. The image reverses the movement of the flood. For so long, water had come down and risen up, covering the world. Now smoke rises from the earth toward heaven. The survivor responds to mercy. The man who walked with God before judgment now worships God after it. This is not a moment that needs to be turned into a lesson. The action itself carries the meaning. Noah understands, at least within the story's movement, that survival was not self-made. The ark preserved him, but the ark was God's provision. The waters carried him, but God remembered him. The ground receives him, but God opened the way. The altar is gratitude shaped in stone, fire, and smoke. It is also the first sacred act of the world after judgment, before human society spreads again, before the names of nations fill later chapters, before the long history of kings, prophets, temples, exile, and return. There is an altar on wet ground. The world begins again, not with noise, but with smoke rising in stillness. Then God speaks over the future. The covenant after the flood is one of the great turning points of Genesis. God blesses Noah and his sons and gives them a renewed place in the world. Humanity is again connected with fruitfulness, life, and the filling of the earth. The story looks back toward creation, but it does not simply repeat Eden. The world after the flood is not innocence restored. It is life preserved after judgment. God's covenant is not only with Noah as an individual, it is with Noah's descendants after him. And it is also with every living creature that came out of the ark. Birds, livestock, every beast of the earth, all are included in the language of the promise. That detail widens the story. The flood was not only about human survival. The ark did not carry only a family. It carried creation's breath. And now the covenant is spoken over life itself. The future is not secured because humanity has become trustworthy in itself. The future rests on divine promise. The promise is that never again will all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. And never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth in this way. Then comes the sign. The bow is set in the clouds. The rainbow is often remembered as the gentle ending of the Noah story, but it should not be made too sweet. It appears after terror. It shines over a world that has passed through judgment. It is beautiful, but its beauty is not light or decorative. It is solemn. It carries memory. The same sky that had poured down judgment now holds a sign of promise. This is the emotional resolution the story gives us. Judgment did not have the final word. The waters rose, but life was preserved. The door closed, but it opened again. The world was judged, but not abandoned. Noah's family was chosen not only to survive, but to stand beneath a covenant that would stretch beyond them. The rainbow belongs to Noah, to his descendants, and to every living creature. It is a sign over the whole earth. And yet Genesis does not allow the story to end in a simple glow. This is one of the reasons the Noah narrative remains so powerful for a mature documentary. After the altar and the covenant, after the rainbow and the promise, the Bible still shows us that the family preserved through judgment remains human. The world has been washed, but human frailty has not vanished. The transition is almost painful. We have just stood beneath the bow in the clouds. We have just heard the language of covenant spoken over life itself. The story could have ended there, with the sky bright and the earth renewed. But Genesis moves forward, and in doing so, it refuses to let the renewed world remain untouched by shame. Noah plants a vineyard. This is the first time Scripture describes a vineyard. and the image is full of post-flood earthiness. The survivor who once built an ark now works the ground. The man who once sealed wood against the waters now plants into the soil that has returned. Life after judgment begins to take form through cultivation, harvest, and human labor. But the scene darkens. Noah drinks wine, becomes drunk, and lies uncovered in his tent. Ham sees his father's nakedness, while Shem and Japheth take a garment walk backward and cover their father without looking upon him. The scene is strange, ancient, and difficult. Genesis does not explain every detail for us. Later readers and traditions have debated its meaning, and the story should not be turned into spectacle. What matters for this documentary is what the scene reveals in the larger movement of Noah's story. The family that survived the flood is still a human family. There is vulnerability, there is shame, there is dishonor. There is an exposed father and sons who respond differently to what they see. There is consequence that reaches beyond the moment. The new world has begun, but the old mystery of the human heart has not disappeared. This does not erase Noah's righteousness. It does not undo his obedience. It does not make the covenant disappear. But it prevents the listener from imagining that the flood solved everything inside humanity. That is crucial. If the story ended only with the rainbow, it might seem that judgment had produced a simple new beginning. But Genesis is more honest than that. The family that survived still carries weakness. The sons who will become ancestors of future peoples are already involved in a moment of family fracture. The new world begins with promise, but also with tension. Preservation is not perfection. This may be one of the deepest answers to the question of why Noah's family was chosen. They were not chosen because humanity had become easy to save. They were not chosen because the future would now be free of failure. They were chosen because God would not let the human story end in violence, even though the human story would continue to need mercy. The flood removes a world filled with corruption, but it does not create sinless descendants. It begins again with a family, a real family, a chosen family, a fragile family. That is why the story is so moving. It holds judgment and mercy together without pretending that either one is small. It shows the seriousness of human violence and the seriousness of divine preservation. It lets the waters rise, but it also lets the ark float. It closes the door, but it also opens it. It gives us the rainbow, but it also shows us the tent. The rainbow and the tent belong to the same story. One shows divine promise over the earth. The other shows human weakness still inside the family that survived. Together they make the ending deeper. Noah's family steps out of the ark as the beginning of a new world, but not as a finished solution to the mystery of humanity. They carry blessing covenant memory and the same fragile nature that will shape the generations after them. From their household will come spreading peoples, future stories, future cities, future violence, future faith, future judgment, and future mercy. The Bible does not ask us to ignore this complexity. It invites us to see that being chosen is not the same as being untouched by weakness. Noah was chosen in a corrupt generation because he walked with God. His household was preserved because the human story had to pass through judgment into promise. But the family that carried life into the new world also carried the need for grace into that world. This gives the story its final weight. When Noah stood before the ark, he stood between a doomed world and an unseen future. When he entered the ark, he carried his household into sealed mercy. When he waded through the flood, he became a survivor of judgment. When he stepped onto wet ground, he became the father of a renewed human story. But that renewed story was still human. The first altar after the flood tells us that survival can rise into gratitude. The covenant tells us that the future is held by promise. The rainbow tells us that God remembers mercy in the clouds. The later family fracture tells us that humanity, even preserved, still needs that mercy. And so the question with which we began can finally be answered, though not in a simple way. Why was Noah's family chosen above everyone else? Because Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Because he was righteous in his generation. Because he walked with God when the earth was filled with violence. Because through him, one household could be drawn into obedience before judgment came. But also because God chose to preserve life through a family not abandoned creation to its corruption. Noah's family was chosen to carry the future. They were chosen to carry animals, descendants' covenant memory, and the fragile hope of a world after judgment. They were chosen not because beginning again would be easy, but because beginning again was still part of God's purpose. The ark brought them through the waters. The altar marked their gratitude. The covenant opened the future. The rainbow stood over them as a sign that judgment would not be the final word. Yet beneath that sign, on the ground of the renewed earth, the human story continued with all its beauty and danger. Noah's family had survived the death of the old world, but now they had to live as the beginning of the new one. That was the burden of being chosen, not only to be spared, not only to step out alive, but to carry humanity forward beneath a promise, while still knowing how deeply humanity would need mercy again. As the chapter closes, imagine the ark behind them, silent now on the mountains. Its work is finished, but its memory remains. The wet earth stretches outward. The animals move into the open world. Smoke from Noah's altar rises into the sky. Above it, the bow appears in the clouds, bright and solemn, over a world that has been judged and preserved. Noah's family stands beneath it. They are not the end of the story. They are the beginning after the end. And so, the story of Noah's family does not end simply with dry ground beneath their feet. It does not end only with animals leaving the ark, with smoke rising from an altar, or with a rainbow stretched across the sky. Those images matter deeply, but they are not the whole meaning of the story. The question we carried from the beginning was this: why was Noah's family chosen above everyone else? Genesis gives us the first answer clearly. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. He was righteous in his generation. He walked with God when the world around him had become filled with violence. But the story also shows us something deeper. Noah was not chosen only to be spared. His household was chosen to carry life through judgment. That is what makes this story heavier than a simple tale of rescue. The ark was mercy, but it was not easy mercy. It was dark and closed and surrounded by waters that erased the world Noah's family had known. The family inside survived, but they survived the ending of everything familiar. When the door finally opened, they did not return to their old life. They stepped into a world that had to begin again. And there on the wet earth, Noah built an altar. Before cities rose again, before nations spread, before kings ruled, and wars filled the earth once more. The first movement of the survivor was upward. Smoke rose into the new sky. The world had been judged, but the human story had not been abandoned. Then came the covenant. The promise was not only for Noah, it was for his descendants and for every living creature. The rainbow was not a soft decoration placed over a gentle story. It was a sign shining after terror, a reminder that judgment would not be the final word over the earth. But Genesis also leaves us with a sober truth. The flood washed the world, but it did not make humanity simple. The family that survived still carried human weakness into the future. The chosen household preserved life, but the mystery of the human heart remained. Perhaps that is why this story still feels so powerful. It is about judgment, but also mercy. It is about survival, but also burden. It is about one family chosen not to escape history, but to carry it forward. When the ark door closed, the future became hidden in darkness. When the door opened, that same future stepped onto wet ground. Above it stood the rainbow. Beneath it stood a human family, saved, grateful, fragile, and still in need of mercy. If this journey through the story of Noah's family gave you something to think about tonight, consider subscribing and joining us for more calm, biblical documentaries. And tell me in the comments what story you want to enter next. Which king-prophet mystery judgment or divine encounter should we explore together after this?